What's up, Internet pals? In today's History with Memes, we're taking a look at the Great Depression and New Deal, so let's go ahead and get it started. Episodes of credit and market instability in the early 20th century, in particular the Great Depression, led to calls for stronger financial regulatory system. And you all know the deal. During the Roaring 20s, there was margin buying in the stock market, little to no regulations, and the whole thing just crashes in October of 1929. Now, unfortunately for your boy Hoover, he gets elected in 1928, and when he's elected, there's a tremendous sense of optimism that this economy is going to continue to boom for years and years to come. And obviously the stock market crash just creeps up and just knocks everyone on their butts. Now, this stock market crash was devastating. A lot of Americans were in the stock market, and so people literally lost everything. And not only is the stock market crashing, but you also have widespread bank failings taking place across the country. Regardless if you were in the stock market or not, there also was unemployment for nearly 25% of the American people. Now, there's an image of Hoover kind of really not doing anything, just kind of watching the whole thing unfold. He had his slogan, "Prosperity is just around the corner, be patient." But Hoover does do some things. He's not just watching the misery and kind of taking photos. He really believed in what was known as trickle-down economics. This would be the way to solve the problem of the Great Depression, and he creates an organization called the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. And basically, long story short, give tax breaks and loans and subsidies to businesses, and the positive impacts would trickle down to the workers and the rest of the American people. Unfortunately, this really doesn't work as quickly, or doesn't really work, and as a result, the Great Depression continues. The other thing Hoover does is considered by most historians to be a big bust and a big mistake. Hoover supports the Smoot-Hawley tariff, which raises tariff rates really high, and that slows trade even further. Unfortunately for Hoover, this kind of really sums up the way most Americans felt he was handling the crisis, with this kind of naive optimism, and things weren't getting better going into 1932, which was an election year. Now, Hoover does do some stuff. He's not just totally asleep at the wheel, but unemployment continues to be around 25%, production continues to drop, and people are struggling. And the thing he's actually most known for doing, the thing most Americans remember, is what ends up happening to the bonus army, those World War I veterans who were camping out in Washington, D.C. Well, it turns out real bad. It's in this setting you have the election of 1932, and the American people were ready for new leadership and a new economic approach, and that's where we get Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, attempted to end the Great Depression by using government power, the power of the federal government, to provide relief to the poor, stimulate recovery, and reform the American economy. They had enough of Hoover's rugged individualism, and so the New Deal is the approach the American people turned to in the election of 1932. Roosevelt, when he takes office in 1933, famously says, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself." His backstory, his origin story, is really fascinating with how he dealt with the issue of polio, and basically now you have his New Deal. And a very important thing to keep in mind about the New Deal is it was using the power of the federal government to try to provide relief, recovery, and reform. And Roosevelt's administration and the Brain Trust were committed to experimentation, trying to use the federal government to fix this economic crisis. Now, this is done with a series of programs that become known as the alphabet agencies. In the first 100 days, you have a bunch of programs, the AAA, the NRA, the TVA, the CCC, and people do get some relief, but the problem is the economy is still sluggish and the Great Depression continues, which leads to radical union and populist movements push Roosevelt toward more extensive efforts to change the American economic system, while conservatives in Congress and the Supreme Court sought to limit the New Deal's scope. And this is really important. You have people who are feeling that the New Deal, people on the left, populist, union members, radicals, feeling like these alphabet agencies, these New Deal programs aren't doing enough to fix this Great Depression. And as a result, the American people are feeling frustrated that things aren't moving fast enough. And that's where you really get the second New Deal starting in 1935, which is going to kind of move the New Deal further to the left and create programs like Social Security, the Wagner Act, which protects labor unions, and the WPA, which broadens public works projects for the unemployed. And so Roosevelt in the second New Deal goes much further with his reforms than he did in the first. Now, on the opposite side, you had conservatives, especially Republicans, who were really worried about this deficit spending and the rising power of the federal government. And so they are very critical of Roosevelt and the New Deal. And Roosevelt tries to take on the Supreme Court with his court packing plan after they rule two of his New Deal programs, the National Recovery Act and the AAA, unconstitutional. And that's a big bust for Roosevelt because he is defeated not by only Republicans, but by Democrats who say, nah, you can't pack the court with people that are friendly to the New Deal. Now back to that point about stronger financial regulatory system. The New Deal, remember, has to address the problems that were happening even before the Great Depression. One of them was the stock market and the lack of regulations. So you see during the New Deal all sorts of new reforms like the Federal Securities Act, such as the Glass-Steagall Act and others that were implemented with the goal of preventing another economic crisis like the Great Depression. Another famous reform still around today is FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which would insure people's bank deposits. One of the things Roosevelt does early on is declare a bank holiday to make sure the American people have faith in this economic American capitalist system. Another thing to keep in mind is during the 1930s, policymakers responded to the mass unemployment and social upheavals of the Great Depression by transforming the U.S. into a limited welfare state, redefining the goals and ideas of modern American liberalism. And a big part of this idea is this idea that there should be a safety net, things like Social Security, that could help out the American people when they fall down. And the New Deal and the Roosevelt administration are really responsible for building this safety net. Now, conservatives and Republicans oftentimes don't like this. They feel like, once again, it's too much government, too much deficit spending, it's going to breed dependency. And so we continue to have these debates in American life about the role of the government. Make sure you also know that although the New Deal did not end the Great Depression, it was actually World War II that does that. It left a legacy of reforms and regulatory agencies and fostered a long-term political realignment in which many ethnic groups, African Americans, and working class communities identified with the Democratic Party. So it is war production that'll get the economy fully back on track, but the New Deal does provide a lot of relief for people, and more importantly, there is a legacy of reforms that are still around today. Things like Social Security, FDIC, projects from the WPA. Now, as always, if you want more information, you want to get into the details, go ahead and click the link in the description to get all the good stuff about the Great Depression and the New Deal. And if you're in an APUSH class, we can help you out with whatever book you are reading. And check out the website for all your government history videos. And always support the channel, Jocz Productions. Thank you for watching. Have a beautiful day. Peace.